Stealth Wealth: 7 Habits to Build Freedom in Silence. Guided by the Quiet Guide. Most financial plans do not fail because of one dramatic mistake. They unravel quietly, almost invisibly, like a slow leak in a tire you do not notice until the car will not move anymore. We live in a world that is loud about money, loud cars, loud opinions, loud success stories. But there is another group quietly building in the background. You rarely hear about them. They do not announce milestones. They do not perform wealth, and yet, they are the ones with options. The ability to say no, the ability to slow down, the ability to walk away without panic. That is what real wealth looks like. Not noise, but freedom. Today, we are looking at 7 financial habits of the quietly wealthy. Not the flashy, not the viral, but the people who build stability so their lives feel lighter instead of heavier. If life has felt loud lately, you are in the right place. Habit 1: Protecting the gap between income and lifestyle. Most people believe financial pressure comes from not earning enough. But for many, the real pressure begins after income increases. You see this play out quietly. A promotion arrives, a business does well, a salary finally feels comfortable, and almost immediately, life expands to meet it. A slightly better car feels reasonable. A nicer place feels earned. Subscriptions multiply because they no longer hurt individually. Nothing feels reckless. Nothing feels dramatic. But slowly, the sense of relief that income was supposed to bring never arrives. Psychology explains why this happens. The brain adapts quickly to improved circumstances, a process known as hedonic adaptation. What once felt like abundance becomes normal, and normal quickly turns into expectation. This is why financial anxiety often persists even as income rises. The mind recalibrates faster than behavior changes. Quietly wealthy individuals recognize this pattern early. They understand that peace does not come from earning more. It comes from creating space between earning and spending. So when their income rises, they do something counterintuitive. They pause. Instead of asking, "What can I upgrade?" they ask, "What pressure can I remove?" For example, rather than buying something new, they might accelerate paying off an old obligation. A car, a credit balance, a lingering financial commitment. The emotional shift here is subtle but powerful. Debt reduction does not create excitement, but it creates exhale. And that exhale compounds. With fewer fixed expenses, every future decision becomes lighter. A job change feels less risky. A bad month feels survivable. A boundary becomes easier to enforce. If faith is part of your worldview, you may recognize this idea reflected in ancient wisdom, where restraint is associated with preservation rather than deprivation. But even without any religious lens, the behavioral insight stands on its own. Margin reduces fear. What quietly wealthy people are really protecting here is optionality. When spending stays stable while income grows, the gap becomes more than savings. It becomes choice. Choice to walk away. Choice to wait. Choice to say no. And this is why this habit matters so deeply, not because it looks disciplined from the outside, but because it creates internal safety. When life throws disruption, and it always does, that protected gap absorbs shock instead of transmitting panic. This is not restriction. This is insulation. And once you feel that insulation, it becomes very hard to give it up. This habit alone explains why some people with high incomes feel trapped, while others with similar earnings feel calm. The difference is not intelligence. It is not ambition. It is not even discipline. It is the decision to protect the space where peace lives. Habit 2: Using silence as a financial strategy. One of the least discussed, yet most powerful financial habits is silence. Not secrecy born of fear, not hiding, but intentional quiet. Most people underestimate how much talking about money changes how they behave with it. A promotion gets announced. A win gets shared. A good year gets mentioned casually over dinner. Almost immediately, the environment shifts. Questions appear. Expectations surface. Advice starts flowing, whether you ask for it or not. Psychology explains this clearly. Humans are deeply influenced by social comparison. When our financial position becomes visible, our decisions begin responding not just to our needs, but to other people's perceptions. Research in behavioral finance shows that increased financial visibility correlates with higher spending, greater risk-taking, weaker long-term planning. Not because people become irresponsible, but because attention changes behavior. The quietly wealthy understand this early. They notice how quickly peace erodes when too many people have opinions about their finances. They notice how even positive attention carries weight. So they choose silence. They do not discuss exact numbers. They do not explain restraint. They do not justify choices that are not meant for public consumption. At social gatherings, they redirect conversations naturally. At work, they remain neutral. When asked intrusive questions, they answer briefly, or not at all. This is not about being evasive. It is about protecting decision space. Here is an example that often goes unnoticed. Someone shares that they are doing well financially. Soon after, they feel pressure to act like someone who is doing well. The dinners become more expensive. The lifestyle subtly escalates. The margin begins shrinking, not because they wanted more, but because expectation crept in. Quiet builders avoid this trap entirely by limiting disclosure. When fewer people know, fewer people project onto your decisions. And when fewer projections exist, clarity stays intact. If faith is part of your worldview, you may recognize this idea reflected in ancient teachings that value quiet action over public display. But even without any spiritual frame, the psychological principle stands on its own. Privacy stabilizes behavior. Silence also protects relationships. Money conversations often distort dynamics. They introduce comparison. They introduce entitlement. They introduce unspoken assumptions. The quietly wealthy preserve relational peace by not turning money into a shared topic unless absolutely necessary. This keeps friendships clean, family relationships simpler, boundaries clearer, and perhaps most importantly, silence protects identity. When financial success is visible, it becomes tempting to perform it, to maintain an image, to live up to an expectation you never agreed to. Quiet wealth refuses that performance. It says, "I am not here to signal, I am here to build." This habit also reduces emotional noise. Every opinion avoided is a mental burden removed. Every comparison skipped is a decision spared, and over time, that mental quiet compounds. You feel steadier, less reactive, less pulled by outside voices. This is why silence is not passive. It is an active financial strategy. It preserves clarity. It protects peace. And it keeps the long game intact. Many people chase validation without realizing the cost. The quietly wealthy understand that the highest form of confidence is not being seen, but being secure. And security grows best in silence. Habit 3. Choosing quality over volume. One of the quietest financial habits shows up not in how much people spend, but in how often they spend. Most people do not realize how exhausting constant purchasing actually is. Not financially at first, mentally. Every purchase creates a chain of decisions: what to buy, where to buy it, how to maintain it, when to replace it, whether it was worth it. Cognitive psychology refers to this as decision fatigue. The brain has a limited capacity for daily choices, and repeated low-level decisions quietly drain energy that could be used elsewhere. The quietly wealthy understand this intuitively. They buy fewer things, but better ones, not to appear refined, but to reduce friction. Think about clothing. Many people own wardrobes full of items that never feel quite right. They spend time deciding what to wear, replacing cheap items, and chasing trends that expire quickly. Quiet builders choose differently. They invest once in pieces that fit well, last longer, and do not demand attention. The result is not just durability, it is mental quiet. The same pattern appears with tools, furniture, and technology. Cheap items break. Breakage creates interruption. Interruption creates stress. Researchers studying consumer behavior have shown that durable goods reduce cognitive load over time, even when the initial cost is higher. Less replacement, fewer regrets, more trust in what you own. The quietly wealthy do not see quality as luxury. They see it as maintenance of attention. Here is a subtle but important contrast. The loud approach seeks volume, more items, more options, more novelty. The quiet approach seeks reliability. They ask, will this quietly support my life or demand energy from it? You can see this clearly in how quietly wealthy people handle technology. They avoid constant upgrades. They keep devices longer. They do not chase features that add complexity without real benefit. This restraint has nothing to do with frugality. It has everything to do with bandwidth. When your environment is dependable, your mind relaxes. If faith is part of your worldview, you may recognize the ancient idea that wisdom preserves strength rather than consuming it. But even without a spiritual frame, the psychological insight remains simple. Stability reduces stress. There is also an emotional layer to this habit. When people buy excessively, it is often an attempt to solve an internal discomfort. Boredom, insecurity, a need for novelty. The quietly wealthy notice this impulse and pause. Instead of reacting, they ask whether the purchase solves a real problem or merely distracts from one. This pause alone prevents countless unnecessary decisions. Over time, choosing quality over volume creates a noticeable shift. Homes feel calmer, spaces feel intentional, time feels less fragmented. This habit also protects money indirectly. Fewer purchases mean fewer ongoing costs. Maintenance drops, replacement cycles slow. But the real benefit is not financial efficiency, it is attention preservation. When your surroundings are stable, your focus sharpens. You are not constantly adjusting, fixing, or compensating. Your environment works with you, not against you. Habit 4. Shifting from status to internal validation. One of the most expensive habits people never account for is the cost of trying to be seen. Not seen as successful, not seen as impressive, just seen. Modern culture quietly trains us to tie worth to visibility. What you drive, where you live, how your life appears when viewed from the outside. And the moment money enters the picture, that pressure intensifies. Neuroscience explains why this is so difficult to resist. The brain is wired to respond to dopamine, the chemical associated with reward and social approval. When others notice our success, dopamine spikes briefly, but the effect fades quickly. That fading creates a loop. The mind looks for the next signal, the next purchase, the next upgrade, the next moment of validation. This is why status-driven spending rarely creates lasting satisfaction. It produces excitement, not security. The quietly wealthy make a different shift. They stop looking outward for confirmation and start anchoring internally. They measure success privately, not by applause, not by comparison, but by stability, flexibility, and peace. Here is what that looks like in everyday life. Someone receives a financial win. Instead of announcing it, they quietly increase their emergency buffer. They invest, they reduce risk. Another person might feel compelled to celebrate publicly, not out of arrogance, but out of habit. The quietly wealthy notice that habit and interrupt it. They ask, what would actually make my life calmer 6 months from now? Psychologically, this shift is powerful. When validation comes from within, spending decisions slow down. You are no longer reacting to how things will be perceived. You are responding to what actually supports your life. This is often described as secure status, confidence rooted in sufficiency rather than performance. If faith is part of your worldview, you may recognize a parallel in teachings that caution against tying identity to possessions or praise. But even without a spiritual frame, The insight stands. External approval is unstable. Internal clarity is durable. There is also a physiological benefit. When people stop chasing validation, stress hormones decrease. Fewer comparisons, less self-monitoring, more presence. You feel this change not as excitement, but as relief. A quiet sense of, I do not need to prove anything today. Over time, this habit reshapes financial behavior. Purchases become less emotional. Upgrades become less urgent. Long-term planning becomes easier. The quietly wealthy do not feel deprived by this shift. They feel grounded. They have nothing to defend and nothing to maintain. This is why their financial lives often feel lighter, even when their responsibilities increase. They are no longer carrying the weight of other people's expectations. When status loses its grip, money regains its proper role. A tool, a buffer, a means to stability, not a mirror for the ego. Habit 5. Maintaining a small high-trust circle. As financial stability grows, something else quietly grows with it. Access. More people want your time. More people want your attention. More people feel entitled to your energy. This rarely arrives all at once. It starts with small things. A request that feels harmless. A favor that feels reasonable. A conversation that lasts longer than it should. Psychology refers to this as social load. Every relationship you maintain occupies mental space. Every unresolved interaction remains open in the background of your mind, even when you are not actively thinking about it. The quietly wealthy are highly selective about this. Not because they are cold, not because they lack compassion, but because they understand a simple truth. You cannot build long-term stability while managing unlimited emotional access. Here is how this often plays out. Someone becomes financially secure and feels pressure to remain constantly available. They answer every call. They listen to every complaint. They step in before anyone asks. Over time, resentment appears, not because they dislike people, but because their energy is being drained quietly, without consent. The quietly wealthy notice this early. They understand that generosity without boundaries turns into depletion, so they choose a different structure. They maintain a small, high-trust circle, a few people, deep relationships, clear expectations. This is not about isolation. It is about sustainability. In practical terms, this means they limit financial discussions to a trusted few. They avoid being drawn into other people's ongoing crises. They do not play the role of emotional regulator for entire groups. If faith is part of your worldview, you may recognize a familiar pattern here. Many ancient teachers withdrew regularly, not to avoid people, but to regain clarity before returning. And if faith is not part of your frame, the psychological principle still applies. Constant emotional availability exhausts the nervous system. There is also a financial dimension to this habit. As resources grow, so do requests. They pause, they evaluate, they decline more often than they accept. Not because they are selfish, but because they understand that mixing finances with unvetted relationships is one of the fastest ways to introduce chaos. This habit protects peace in a very specific way. It prevents decision fatigue disguised as generosity. When too many people have access to you, every interaction becomes a micro-decision. Should I help? Should I respond? Should I step in? The quietly wealthy remove this friction by deciding in advance who has access. Everyone else is met with kindness, but distance. Over time, this creates a noticeable shift. Conversations become more intentional. Relationships feel cleaner. Energy returns. You stop feeling pulled in 10 directions at once. Your attention becomes available for what actually matters. This is why quietly wealthy people often appear calm even when responsibilities increase. They are not carrying the emotional weight of the room. They have chosen carefully who they walk closely with. This habit is not about cutting people off. It is about choosing who gets to walk beside you and who remains respectfully at a distance. And that choice protects more than money. It protects peace. Habit 6. Buying time, not things. One of the clearest differences between loud wealth and quiet wealth is what money is actually used for. Most people assume money exists to buy nicer things, bigger homes, better cars, more upgrades. But the quietly wealthy use money for something far less visible and far more powerful. They use it to buy time. Time scarcity is one of the strongest drivers of stress in modern life. Neuroscience shows that when the brain perceives time pressure, it activates the same stress pathways as physical threat. The nervous system does not distinguish between "I am in danger" and "I am running out of time." Both produce urgency. Both reduce clarity. Both impair decision-making. This is why people often feel overwhelmed even when nothing dramatic is happening. Their days are crowded. Their attention is fragmented. Their time does not belong to them. The quietly wealthy recognize this early. They understand that every obligation they purchase becomes a future tax on their time. A larger home requires more maintenance. A more complex lifestyle requires more coordination. A higher consumption level creates more decisions. So instead of asking, "What can I afford?" they ask, "What will this cost me in time and attention?" Here is a common example. Two people earn similar incomes. One upgrades aggressively, bigger home, more features, more complexity. The other stays simple and uses excess income to reduce obligations. Years later, the difference is not visible in possessions. It is visible in mornings. One wakes up already behind, mentally negotiating the day before it begins. The other moves slowly, deliberately, with space to think. The quietly wealthy buy back time in small, unglamorous ways. They automate repetitive tasks. They outsource low-value labor when it makes sense. They simplify systems rather than expanding them. This might look like paying for reliable help rather than spending weekends catching up, or choosing convenience in areas that reduce cognitive load, not inflate status. Psychologically, this has a powerful effect. When time pressure decreases, the brain shifts out of survival mode. Cortisol drops, focus improves, emotional regulation strengthens. You feel this not as excitement, but as calm, a sense that the day is no longer chasing you. If faith is part of your worldview, you may recognize a parallel in teachings that emphasize stewardship of time rather than accumulation of things. And if faith is not part of your frame, the principle still holds. Time is the only resource that cannot be replenished. This habit also reshapes ambition. When people buy things, they often feel locked into maintaining them. They tolerate unhealthy environments. They accept conditions that drain them because obligations demand it. Quietly wealthy individuals structure their lives differently. They preserve the option to say no. No to toxic work. No to unsustainable demands. No to situations that erode health. That flexibility is not laziness. It is leverage. There is also an emotional honesty in this habit. Buying time acknowledges a limit. It accepts that energy is finite, attention is precious, and life is not meant to be rushed endlessly. Over time, this creates a noticeable shift. Decisions slow down, reactivity decreases, presence returns. The quietly wealthy are not always relaxed, but they are rarely frantic. Their lives have rhythm rather than urgency. This is why this habit matters so deeply. Not because time purchases look impressive, but because they restore ownership of the day. When money buys time, peace follows naturally, and peace is the foundation that allows everything else to grow. Habit 7. Building momentum without intensity. One of the quietest signals of lasting wealth is how unexciting the process looks from the outside. No dramatic leaps, no frantic acceleration, no emotional swings tied to headlines or trends. Most people associate progress with intensity, working harder, pushing faster, doing more now. But intensity is unstable. It burns hot, and then it burns out. The quietly wealthy understand something most people miss. Momentum matters more than force. From a scientific perspective, this is not philosophical, it is mathematical. Compounding works quietly, consistently, and without drama. Small, repeated actions, when left undisturbed, outperform aggressive strategies that rely on timing, emotion, or constant adjustment. This is why people who chase fast money often experience volatile outcomes. They interrupt the process. They react to noise. They change direction too often. They override patience with urgency. The quietly wealthy do the opposite. They choose systems that work in the background. Regular investing, long-time horizons, minimal interference. Here is how this shows up in real life. When markets rise, they do not celebrate. When markets fall, they do not panic. They continue. This emotional neutrality is not indifference. It is discipline practiced early. Neuroscience explains why this is difficult. The brain is wired to respond to novelty and threat. News cycles exploit this wiring by triggering fear or excitement, both of which impair long-term thinking. The quietly wealthy recognize this vulnerability and design around it. They limit exposure to financial noise. They reduce how often they check accounts. They resist commentary that encourages reaction. This is not avoidance. It is environmental control. By reducing stimulation, they allow rational decision-making to remain intact. They trust the system rather than their mood. If faith is part of your worldview, you may recognize a parallel here. Many spiritual traditions emphasize endurance over spectacle, patience over haste. And even without a religious frame, the behavioral truth remains clear. Consistency beats urgency. Momentum without intensity also protects emotional health. When progress is quiet, setbacks feel smaller. When expectations are realistic, stress decreases. You stop asking, "Is this working yet?" and start trusting, "This works over time." This habit also stabilizes identity. People who rely on intensity often tie self-worth to performance spikes. When progress slows, confidence collapses. The quietly wealthy anchor identity differently. They identify as builders. Builders do not rush foundations. They lay brick after brick, knowing that strength accumulates invisibly. Over time, this creates something rare: financial progress without emotional exhaustion. You see this most clearly during uncertainty, when conditions change, when markets fluctuate, when others react. Quiet builders remain steady, not because they are smarter, but because they decided early not to confuse motion with progress. This habit is the reason quietly wealthy people often appear calm under pressure. They are not gambling their future on short-term outcomes. They are letting time work for them. And when time is allowed to work uninterrupted, it becomes the most powerful ally available. Closing reflection. Wealth is not what you show, it is what you keep. It is the quiet confidence of knowing you are steady, that you are prepared, that you can move at your own pace. If this slowed your thinking, even slightly, that is enough. If someone you care about might benefit, share it gently. Not to fix them, just to offer perspective. And if this resonated, a quiet thumbs up or comment helps this space reach people who value calm progress over noise. This is Quiet Grind Daily, where self-improves reset. Calm mind, consistent action. Come back when the world feels loud, or stay for the next quiet moment.